everyone. Welcome to the Level Up Your Legacy podcast. Yes, you, real human being you, person who is breathing with skin on, with wants, desires, feelings, and aspirations. We are glad that you are here and that you have tuned in today. We're talking about a very human subject today. We're talking about doing the right thing. Now, let me tell you, doing the right thing is a really, really big deal because it can make or break your life. It can shipwreck your organization. It can tarnish your reputation if you don't do it, but also because your legacy matters. Legacy is a big deal to us because you do not exist in a vacuum. Your life will impact other lives, and your legacy, what you leave behind in other people, is all that will be left of you someday. So no pressure, right? No pressure, right, Bill? Got to get this right.
No pressure at all.
So today we're talking about doing the right thing. And the chapter from Ego is the Enemy that we are discussing is called The Effort is Enough. And I'll tell you what, I am super stoked for today's dialogue. I'm Paul McCosco. This is Bill Cox. Say what's up, Bill?
Hi, everybody.
Coming to you from his newly painted bedroom. I'm just kidding.
How do you like my trees and birds?
I love it. I love it.
It's there to make everybody happy today.
I love it. We're both coaches with Bill Cox Coaching, and we're excited to have you along for today's ride. So feel free to join in our discussion by commenting on the video below, by asking us a question, maybe even just leaving us some feedback. We'd love to know what jumps out to you about our discussion. And without further ado, let's dive in together. I want to ask you a question. Have you ever heard of Belisarius? Belisarius. Is it ringing any bells? Me neither. Until I read this chapter, I had never heard of Belisarius, and I'll tell you why. Now check this out. Belisarius was the highest ranking military commander under the Roman Emperor Justinian. He was not only high ranking, but he was victorious in battle multiple times. He rescued the throne from violent barbarian uprisings, and he even saved the Western civilization not once, not twice, but 3 different times. Now, talk about an incredible resume. So why has no one ever heard of him? Well, here's why. Okay. The paranoid Emperor Justinian, he reportedly placed Belisarius under suspicion. His good deeds and his sacrifices for his country were undone by bad policy. And even his own personal historian was corrupted to tarnish his image, despite all of the good deeds he did and all of the sacrifices that he made. Yikes. I'll tell you what, bad things happen to good people, even when they set out to do good things. Now, maybe the justice bone inside of you, like it is inside of me, is kind of writhing. We hate to see when these things happen, but it happens all the time. The one thing that's cool about it is Belisarius never complained, never argued, never pushed back. He was content to do the right thing. So Bill, let's camp here for a second. First question I have, what can keep you grounded when others seek to undermine you?
Yeah. And, we were talking about this earlier. I can't say I can really relate to Belisarius and what he went through. I've not had many stories from my past where there have been people intentionally really trying to railroad me or undermine me. But I think there are a lot of people, or even who could say that. You definitely had somebody who at work, maybe they're jealous of you, maybe your position, maybe your relationship or connection with the boss. Maybe it relates to
how fast you've climbed the corporate ladder compared to them. Yeah.
Or like maybe you work in some kind of a medical office, and when people come in, they like to see you. And some of the other people in the office, they see that, and so that makes them jealous. Or there's a lot of people who do experience things like that. So then out of jealousy or insecurity, things are said about us, things that are done to us that aren't just, aren't fair, aren't true. Maybe even, I thought too of just, how about the people who've worked faithfully in their jobs for decades, who've done good work. And maybe that work has gone unnoticed. Maybe that work hasn't been remunerated in really what it was worth. People don't get paid what they're worth and can work decades and not be treated like they really are valuable to the organization. And those are hard things. It's easy to, there are a lot of people who could say, yeah, I've worked years and I don't feel like I've been valued. I don't feel like I've been recognized. I don't feel like I've been paid what I deserve. I think there are a lot of people in that category. And for me, that's where my faith really becomes central.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, I always keep in mind, ultimately, I'm not working for man. I'm not working for people. I'm not working for a company. Ultimately, I'm working for God. One of my
Hmm.
favorite verses in the New Testament, Paul says he's encouraging people like, like Belisarius, or like maybe if you're listening to this and you feel like you've been overlooked and you're like, this is never going to be made right in my life. You might even be retired, right?
Hmm.
And Paul, that's always been the case throughout history, because human nature has always been that way, right?
Sure.
And Paul says, work willingly at whatever you do as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people.
Wow.
Remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward, and that the master you are serving is Christ. That's why my faith is foundational to my life. That's why my faith is central. I recognize that every day when I go to work, when I do what I do, ultimately I'm doing it for the Lord, and he's the perfect boss.
Hmm.
He will always recognize the good work that I do and reward that. I think that's an amazing thing. That's why Jesus told his followers, hey, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, not on earth. In other words, like Jesus is saying, put a lot more energy or a lot more focus on your eternal 401k than
I
your
like that.
than your than your earthly 401k or your earthly salary. If you measure this life in relationship to eternity, think about that.
Hmm.
Think about where your focus should be. I remember, you know who Craig Rochelle is, and he tried to give, in one of his messages one time, he tried to give people like an understanding of like your life in relationship to eternity. And he took a long rope that went clear across the stage, and he put a little tape mark like in the middle. And he's like, this is time before your life, and this is time after your life. And your life is just like this little tiny mark on this rope.
That's perspective right there.
Yeah. And I think, wow, what's that little mark in relationship to that rope that's going clear across the other side of the stage into eternity? And I want to put my emphasis into eternity, where really the things that I'm doing now are going to impact all of eternity. And I think it's really awesome to know that, hey, maybe my boss doesn't see, maybe I'm being taken advantage of in my job. Maybe nobody will ever recognize the good work that I do, but God sees, and
Hmm.
God's going to reward that. And that's going to be recognized for eternity. Um, to me, that puts it all in perspective. And I can be okay with knowing that, like, even if my earthly boss doesn't see, in a world that's kind of broken and doesn't work right, God is going to balance those scales and reward that in eternity.
Hmm.
And I think that makes all the difference.
No, I love that. I like how you referenced human nature too. This has been going on for a long time and it will go on for a long time. And even
Yeah.
just understanding that allows you to almost expect that bad things are going to happen. So when they do happen to you, you can respond instead of reacting. I think we get into trouble. We start to tarnish things when we start that visceral reaction of why me? Why now? Like,
Yeah.
but we have that expectation that's going to happen. We can respond. We frame our life in a proper perspective with all of eternity. We have that anchor, like you're talking about, like your faith. That's an anchor, right? That's what you build your life upon. That is the goal of why you exist. And so that's very freeing. That's very grounding
Yeah.
when bad things happen.
I mean, there's a lot of ways we could go with this conversation, right? I mean, we could talk about there's something to be said for standing in your value. Sometimes we don't get paid what we're worth because we don't ask for it, because we don't stand in our value. So there's something to be, we could have a conversation about that. We could have a conversation about there's options out there. And sometimes you need to probably leave the place you're at and go to a place where you will be valued. And sometimes fear keeps us from that, right? Or complacency or being comfortable. There's a lot of ways that we could take this conversation. This conversation isn't meant to address all those aspects of it, but to say that maybe you're in a situation where you feel like, hey, I'm supposed to be here. It's not the greatest situation. And I think it's in those cases where there's a bigger picture in play here. And for me, that's why faith is so central to my life. I did a funeral on Monday for my aunt on my wife's side of my family. And I said, it's so easy to get so caught up in this life. Our jobs, raising kids, dealing with inflation, paying bills, just completely getting ready for the brown season. I mean, all these things, right? That can just completely consume us. It's almost like my German Shepherd. When I deal with Merrick, his whole orientation is down.
Yeah.
Because as an animal, his life is completely consumed with the five senses. What he smells, what he sees, everything is down. And sometimes we can lose. It's like what Solomon talks about in the Old Testament when he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, and he talks about this concept of life under the sun. And he was talking about a perspective of life as if God doesn't exist. Living life as if there's no sense of eternity, as if there's no spiritual element to my life, as if there's not anything beyond this life. If you think that everything about your life is wrapped up in this life, then you're going to have a very different perspective about your job than someone who has what Solomon also talks about as life above the sun. Life that there's an element to my life that I can't see and feel and touch right here, but that is as real as the floor that I'm sitting on, is as real as the wall behind me with the cool tree on it. And it's the spiritual realm. And it's eternity. It's real. And I think that's why so many people feel incomplete in life, because they're living their life disconnected from that ultimate realm of the eternal and the spiritual. And when you have that, it changes the way you look at everything, including your job, such that even if you don't have the ideal work situation, with an eternal perspective, with the reality that God sees, I can approach my work from a completely different mindset.
Well, let's camp on this thought of mindset for a second, right? Because there's one mindset that says, I work hard, I deserve things. And there's another mindset that says, I work hard to be the best that I can be, right? I think Holiday capitalizes on that thought. He asserts this. He says, we need to be recognized. We need to be compensated. Especially problematic is the fact that often we get that. We are praised, we're paid. We start to assume that these two things always go together. The expectation hangover inevitably ensues. Now, I like the 401, heavenly 401k term. Now, I think that's my second favorite term in this is the expectation hangover. This is some pretty good terminology that we've got going on here. Let's talk about what this expectation hangover is. What causes an expectation hangover, and I guess what keeps you from experiencing it so you don't have its effects?
Well, we have needs.
Mhm.
We have legitimate needs. I always like going back to Maslow's hierarchy. We have this hierarchy of needs, and the concept of psychologists for decades who've been studying human behavior reach some conclusions about humans, right? And the
Mhm.
things that they need, because they consistently see these things in people, and like people are motivated to experience or achieve certain needs. And when those ones on the bottom of the pyramid are met, then they'll be motivated to meet those needs higher. So we have various needs. I have physiological needs. I have safety needs. I have need for love and belonging. We are created as God's image bearers. This is another eternal orientation God thing. I believe I'm created in the image of God, and therefore I am created for relationship. God himself exists in community, in relationship.
Hmm.
God is triune. So I'm created for relationships. So I'm created for love. I'm created for belonging. We're created to be in, because I'm created in God's image. I'm created with dignity, right?
Hmm.
Every person that you look at, cross paths with, shake hands with, work with, um, they have dignity and need to be treated with value, with respect, right? These are needs. These are legitimate needs. And when they're met, what happens? Well, we have chemicals in our brain that fills us with this sense of well-being and happiness when those needs are met,
Mhm.
because God created us to experience certain things, for life to be experienced a certain way. And when it's experienced, we feel happy. We feel this sense of shalom, peace, richness, fulfillment. And when they're not met, the opposite happens, other other hormones or chemicals are released, like in the body, like cortisol, and these fear chemicals get flushed throughout the body, and we move more into this realm of, hey, something's not right. We move into a sense of protection, a sense of fear, a sense of unhappiness. But at the end of the day, part of living in my integrity, when those things don't happen, guess what? We live in a world where things are broken, things don't work right. Most people work in work environments that have issues. Why? Because they're filled with people who
Human
have
beings.
issues, who are broken, right? And
Yes.
so are we. So there's going to come those times where my needs aren't met. And I think part of that's that time, going back to mindset. I have to still live in my integrity. I still have to show up as a responsible adult and take responsibility for my attitude in those times, for
Hmm.
my responses to those people when I'm not treated right. I still have a responsibility to have a good attitude, to be grateful, to be responsible, to be respectful toward others, to treat other people the way I would want to be treated, regardless of whether they treat me that way or not. That's living in my integrity. And that's being an adult.
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
it's not always easy to be an adult.
Adulting is
Um,
hard.
it is. And so I think recognizing I have needs, but also when they're not met, still choosing to show up in my integrity and be the person that I want to be, that highest version of myself, regardless of how people treat me, I think is really important.
He
I
goes
think,
on.
one other thing on this, Paul, too, is
Mhm.
like, that's why in coaching, we help people work a lot in getting clear on your core values.
Mhm.
What, how do you want to show up in this life? What are those values, those principles,
The
those
things that
ways
are
of,
for sale.
yeah, those ways of being that you want to define and characterize who you are? So many of those values are what? They're more internal, they're more character based than they are external. So like, these are who I want to be, regardless of how people treat me. This is who I want to show up and consistently be in this world. And at the end of the day, this is how I want to be remembered.
Hmm. And that's hard work to figure that out. You know,
Very
that's
hard.
thinking work. That's not like put your head down and keep going work. That's stop, reevaluate, recalibrate kind of work. And maybe if you've never done that kind of work, a great first step for you would be to list out those things that are your priorities. What's not for sale? How do you want to be remembered in this life? What are you not willing to compromise on? Even just to write those down is a powerful exercise that will lock those things in your mind. So that way, when the
Yeah.
situation comes up, you won't be tempted to
Yeah.
waver on those things that aren't for sale. All right, I want to continue our discussion. Another quote from Holiday says, this is an uplifting one. It says, you will be unappreciated. You will be sabotaged. You will experience surprising failures. You can see he's really lifting people up. Your expectations will not be met. You will lose. You will fail. How do you carry on then? How do you take pride in yourself and in your work? And I think we started to touch on this, Bill. Like, I think about a talk that you give, probably one of my favorite talks that you give. It's called Who Are You When No One's Looking? It's all about personal integrity. Why does integrity matter? Brass tacks, why is this even important?
Well, a little bit has to do with what we talked about originally. Again, as a person of faith, I believe that everything that we do in life, we will give an account for. Everything we do in this life, I'm going to give an account for in the next life
Mhm.
before a holy God, right? And which is why, as a follower of Christ, that's so important to me, because that's why Jesus came to this earth. Jesus came to this earth to bridge the gap between my sin and God's holiness.
Hmm.
And I know that if it's dependent on me to stand before God as acceptable in my own efforts, I'm done because I'm a sinner and I'm broken. Even my best attempts, still at 55 years old, I don't get it right on a daily basis. And so, speaking of integrity, Jesus is the only human being in the history of the planet who's lived a life of perfect integrity,
Hmm.
both in his actions, in his words, in his thoughts, in his intentions, in his motivations, perfect and righteous and sinless, such that by putting my trust in him, then he goes. That's why Jesus came to this earth, to live a life that I couldn't live and to pay the penalty for that my sins incurred, which is why the story of the cross, Jesus went to the cross to do what? To die for what? For my sin and for all of our sin. And that if we put our trust in him, he gives, it's kind of like the great exchange. He deposits his righteous life into my account, and I, in exchange, give him my sin and brokenness, such that by trusting in him, my sins are covered and forgiven because Jesus paid my penalty and gave me his righteousness. So when I leave this earth and stand before God, God sees me not through my efforts, but through the efforts of Jesus. He sees me through the perfection of Jesus. And so I stand acceptable in his sight. But it matters. The life I live on this earth does matter, because even as a Christian, I'll stand before God and give an account for how I lived my life. And I'll be rewarded in eternity in relationship to that.
Hmm.
So there's that lens, but there's also the lens of, in our business, this is all about leaving a legacy. Life is all about leading, is all about leaving a legacy. At the end of the day, we're all going to leave one, whether we intend to or not, whether we want to or not, whether we plan to or not. We're all going to leave something behind in people. And the
Hmm.
question is, what are we leaving behind? Are we leaving something behind of value that enriches people, that adds value to people, that points people to a way of life that leads to life? right? That leads to a prospering in relationships, a prospering at your work. And one of my favorite quotes is a quote by J.R. Miller, who says, "The only thing that walks back from the tomb with the mourners and refuses to be buried is the character of a man." This is true. What a man is survives him. It can never be buried. That's really what matters. Not how you're treated at work, not how much money you make. It's how you live your life consistently, day in and day out, whether you're at work or in the comfort of your home or when you're alone in your office. Are you the same person? Are you showing up as that same person whose life is driven and directed by a higher sense of values? Because, like Joe Stoll said years ago when I went to a leadership conference, he said, time and truth walk hand in hand. Ultimately, who I am, my true character, will be revealed. That's what will be remembered. And that's what really matters. People are going to remember me not for my job, how much money I made, but how I lived my life, how I responded to being mistreated, how I chose to even continue to do a great job, even though I wasn't paid what I was worth, how I chose to have a great attitude and treat my boss with respect, even though I was disrespected. Those are the things that when people gather around your casket and my casket one day, those are the things that are going to be talked about. And I've done a lot of funerals, and I always know the difference between a life that's been lived well and a life that hasn't. And it really matters because we leave something in people when we leave this earth. And what is it that we're leaving in them? Is it of eternal value? Is it going to enrich their lives? Or is there going to be a greater sense of, wow, this person missed the mark. They had an opportunity and they were not able to discern and live in harmony with that which really mattered in life.
Wow, that's a powerful set of thoughts, and the good news is you can start working on your legacy any day. It's never too late to start becoming the person that you want to be remembered. Holiday said this at the end of the chapter. He said, do your work, do it well, then let go and let God. That's all there needs to be. Now, can it really be that simple? I think it can. It isn't that complicated. Your gut will attest to that. There's no pillow as soft as a clear conscience. I love that quote. So, well, as we close today, I want to thank you for tuning in. We're going to make a recording of this video available to our subscribers at billcoxcoaching.com. If you haven't yet signed up for our newsletter, I'd encourage you to do that today. Again, go to billcoxcoaching.com, click on the little free newsletter button, and we'll get you connected. We hope that you've enjoyed our discussion today. Maybe take a minute to tag someone in this post or share this video with someone who may find it helpful. We'd really appreciate that. And until next time, this is Paul McCosco and Bill Cox saying so long for the Level Up Your Legacy live stream and podcast.
Hey, thanks again for watching today's video. And before you go to the bottom of the screen, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and make sure you go to billcoxcoaching.com, sign up for our regular newsletter to help you move from success to significance and lead your life in such a way that you live a legacy. Have a great day.